Yes, sir. Cox,
Here.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Nunez,
Here.
Pimentel,
Here.
Chair Frail.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Closed session report, we got a few updates on labor, recruitment. Any modifications to public comment at this time, Professor?
I have no raised hands, sir.
The audience of the Zoom. Okay. Comments from board members? No hands. We'll move on. Consent item. Consider approval for the February 22nd, 2016. Public staff recommendation.
I can second.
Okay. Cox,
Yes.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Nunez,
Yes.
Pimentel,
Yes.
Chair Frail.
Yes.
Motion by Nunez, seconded by Cox. Motion passes unanimous.
Okay, next item is discussion of Powell Valley Healthcare District interim chief executive officer recommendation. Pass a motion appointing Matt O'Brien as the interim chief executive officer of the district effective immediately. Comments, discussion, questions?
No hands raised from the public.
Okay. I'll move as recommended.
I'll second that. Get that done, Dr. Cox.
I did, sir. Thank you. Cox,
Yes.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Nunez,
Yes.
Pimentel,
Yes.
and Chair Frail.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous.
Item number 3, Powell Valley Healthcare District Project Board Member Appointment. Recommendation and motion of interim chief executive officer Matt O'Brien as the ex officio board member of the Powell Valley Healthcare District Project. Who's that recommendation?
And that was
Yes.
Mr. Pimentel.
Yes.
Yes. Second.
Pimentel.
Thank you. All righty. Cox.
Check for public comments.
I'm sorry, there's no raised hands.
The present audience being able. Go ahead. John.
Okay. Cox,
Yes.
Gallagher,
Yes.
Nunez,
Yes.
Pimentel,
Yes.
Chair Frail.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous.
Supplemental agenda, which is discussion of potential tax and board measure for the 2024 ballot recommendations. Maxwell, you want to tee this up for us?
Sure. So, Mr. John Isom is here to present to the board the potential and the background on moving forward with the bond measure next year. Go ahead.
Take it away. Great. Hey, pleasure to be here this evening. My name is John Isom. I'm with Isom Advisors, and we're financial advisors to municipalities throughout the state of California. I've got a brief presentation that I want to take you through. One to do some education on the process, how things work, and then also to give you a little bit about who I am and who we work with, and what we ultimately do for districts. I have to say, I am and was very excited for this opportunity. But boy, what an amazing story you guys have to tell. And as I was putting together some of this analysis, we were looking at things like, wow, this could be a real game changer for this district. Could is the opposite word. There's no guarantee of anything there. So let me take you through this presentation real quick. The first slide, I think, just is a bit of an introduction, but just so you know who I am and what we do. Again, we're what's called a financial advisor. Right? We're a fiduciary to municipalities. We have a legal obligation to provide you with good financial advice. It's in your best interest. I don't represent banks, don't represent underwriters, we don't represent attorneys, right? We represent whatever client is appropriate. We work and have been the #1 financial advisor to municipalities throughout the state of California for the last, I think, 12 years. I myself have done this for 25 years. That's the only thing I've ever done. I didn't think I would start and continue. But I thought, well, this is great. Financial advice to municipalities, specifically school districts. My grandma taught special ed, great grandma was a teacher, my sister is a teacher, aunts and uncles, and my degree was in finance, so I thought the perfect little match here. And it's been great. I absolutely love what I do. I have a huge passion. I enjoy the slog, the work, but I also enjoy coming back when there's a ribbon cutting ceremony like I got to do last week down at San Diego, see kind of the fruits of the labor. It's an incredible feeling. I don't know if we're stuck or maybe if we can get to the next slide, or is it?
Pinky?
Okay, and as that's coming up, done a lot of work with different municipalities, school districts, rec park districts. One more slide. In the county, in Monterey County, and Santa Cruz County, and have worked with just a lot of different districts, fire districts, military districts, rec park districts, cities. Basically, when the district said, hey, we need money, say, all right, let us figure out what's the best way to get it. And a lot of times, what is needed is a bond or local tax measurement. Next slide, please. Specifically here, a small font, apologies in advance, but I wanted to give you an idea of just how common bond programs are. This is 2022, and these are just districts that we work with. And we work with more districts than anybody, about 40% of the successful bond programs we worked with. In the state last year, you had close to 100 throughout the year that approved these types of things. A lot of those schools, right, their demands are significant and they have a lower threshold. For you guys and others, 2/3 supermajority, school districts, 55%. Not quite there, but it's easier to pass the school bond in many respects. But I will say this, healthcare districts have had tremendous success as well. And a lot of it happens to be who votes for these measures, where I never miss an election, high propensity voter, go out there, tend to skew a little bit older, tend to use your facilities a little more, right? So we've had great success with healthcare districts, but it doesn't just mean because we've had success or hospitals are successful, or even in 22 were successful, that still doesn't mean that people are successful. But what it does mean is that the water's fine for a lot of municipalities, and they've seen success even with inflation and, fill in the blanks, whatever you want to call, the supply chain issues and everything else that people want to complain about. A lot of these bond programs still pass. Let's get to the next slide. Specifically about Pajaro Valley Healthcare District, right? So bond programs are based on a district's assessed value. That's the value that the county assessor places on the property. It's not the market value. It's not what you sell your property. It's assessed. And that's how taxes are levied, right? Your assessed value is X. The county applies 1% for the county tax collection. And then there's typically little line items and assessments for other entities that may have gone to the voters. So you might have the college, community college district. You might have the unified school district. You might have a mosquito abatement line item, right? Every community is different, and each one has a different line item. But those line items are based on your assessed value. My mom's a great example. Her dream was to always live in $1 million house. She said, I didn't think we'd be this 4-year-old time. But I grew up in the East Bay in Danville. Her house is probably worth $2 million, but she bought it in my dad bought it in 1974. It's assessed at $200,000. Her taxes are on $200,000. So a nice little checks and balance if you're a fixed income senior citizen you're paying far less than someone who just buys $1 million or $2 million piece of property. So it's based on the assessed value. Let's look specifically at yours. I'm going to give a caveat here because it is a challenge to find out the values. Typically, the State Board of Equalization, they establish TRAs or tax rate areas. And they say these are the tax rate areas that make up Pajaro Valley Healthcare District. When we called them, they didn't have the answer. And we said, well, let's go to the county assessor. They'll have the answer. We called them, and they didn't have the answer. Well, let's go to the other county assessor. They didn't have the answer. Long story short, we said, well, we know at least what the legal definition of the boundaries are. And I have a friend who's a wizard in the GIS mapping. He said, give me the files. I'll tell you what the TRAs are based on the GIS legal boundary maps, and then I'll add to it what those values are. So take this for what it is, which I would call a pretty darn good estimate, but ultimately we're going to want to rely upon an official source, which ultimately will be State Board of Equalization. Now, if you see at the top of that table, it says Pajaro Valley Unified. That's not you, right? You guys don't take in Aptos. This is other parts of the county. But for historical, we wanted to give you an idea of what kind of growth this community has seen, generally speaking. So the Unified District, over time, look at the third column to the right there, has averaged about 4.1% AU growth or assessed value growth year-over-year. What that means is that every year the district is growing, even if it's just changing the hands of property owners. Right? My mom, whenever she sells that house, is ultimately going to see a major reset from 200,000 to some much bigger number, right? So you don't have to have new homes built in order to see growth. Some of it is just a change in of property. What we did conclude is that top bullet point, and that's the healthcare district's 22-23 assessed value for our calculations is about 14.1 billion. That's your base. And when you apply a tax rate, 14.1 billion, and you assume growth going forward, which we can do because we know 4.1% is your recent history, then we can generate a stream of tax revenues in the future that become the basis for repaying investors. So when you think of a bond, think of a home mortgage, right? Bank gives you the money up front, and then you make payments for the next 30 years to repay it. Bond investors give you the money up front, and then you use tax revenues among all residents and all property owners in the district to repay that debt over 20, 25, 30 years, depending on how long the bond program is. So you like to see growth, which you have. You like to see a decent sized tax base, 14 billion. My own calculation is certainly of note. So let's look at the punchline. If there's an exciting bit of data or the exciting page, this might be it. This is how much could we generate under a bond program at different tax rates. Now I just put 19, 25, $30. It could be 60, it could be 160, it could be $9, it could be $5. Right? There's not a set tax rate that you're stuck with. There's no cap. You can literally choose any tax rate. And the goal is the tax rate of voters might be willing to support. And that oftentimes there's a bit of a conflict of what we want and what we might need and what the government is. So if you look here though, at $19, looking over to the far right hand side, you're generating about $80 million for $19 per $100,000 tax rate. What that means, by the way, the $19 per $100,000 of assessed value tax rate means if I have a piece of property that's worth $100,000 assessed on market, I'm taxing $19 per year. My property is worth $1 million assessed, then my tax rate would be $190. For the vast majority, it's going to be somewhere in between. If I have a property that's worth $10,000, and a lot of people think like that, there's no property worth $10,000. I just looked at a district today, and I said, oh, hey, by the way, you've got 600 properties that are assessed under $100,000, and a handful of them even under $25,000. And these could be pieces of dirt, mobile homes, something that's been in the family for decades or generations. But in any case, that's how that tax rate works. So thinking about calculations, it's per 100,000 of assessed value. Certainly a higher tax rate is going to generate more proceeds. One of the unique characteristics of a bond program is qualified use is how we can spend money. Unlike a parcel tax or sales tax that some entities can use, and those dollars can be used for operating, that is not the case. You have to use capital improvements. Now, the creative part, and I think what I liked earlier was this concept of, hey, well, here's some new revenue streams we want to get, or here's how we can increase other revenue streams. I would say put on the hat of what type of a capital improvement can we have here that would increase revenue streams. So maybe it's, and I don't do enough healthcare districts, and so if I even try to do a bad analogy about creating some new radiology machines, I don't want to be laughed out of the room. But you get the idea, like, hey, we could buy these incredible new machines and generate more revenues, generate more customers, more clients, more patients that come in that use those types of facilities, and a bond can pay for it. Conversely, there are expenses that are going out the door. You guys have lease payments that you make. You can buy things. You can buy the land. You can buy buildings, and you can eliminate these payments. That's a net plus to you. How much does the district spend in electricity? Right? Do solar. That's purpose of water. Hospitals have to have a dedicated electric source, but school districts, cities, they say, hey, we're just going to put up a bunch of solar. We're going to get energy efficient PVC, smart lighting, smart control, all that stuff. And I'm going to save myself $1 million, $500,000, $2 million, whatever you have to spend. So keep that in mind as you consider the options and the opportunities that this has, is that it not only can build things or fix things or repair things, it certainly can provide different revenue streams through their additional revenues. Okay? So this is also what I would kind of consider a budget page. Sometimes a district says, oh, we're going to find out how much all this stuff costs. And we're going to have an architect come in, they're going to walk the sites, they're going to come back. And sometimes with architects, their eyes get real big and they say, oh, we have $800 million worth of money. Why would you design something with $800 million? This is the budget slide. So as you're evaluating what the total needs might be, this is what you would want to kind of do in this ballpark, right? 80 to $150 million perhaps. Sometimes you get the question, well, why is it spaced out over time? You can see there's different bond sales, Series A, 2025, for example, Series B, Series C. Two reasons. One, it allows you to have a lower tax rate by stretching it out over time. And two, it allows you to get more projects done in a more reasonable manner or fashion. Most entities can't take 127 million and literally blow everything up at the same time. So you still have to provide services. So you can't just cut everything up and start renovating, modernizing, not continue to do your core mission there. So this allows a certain phasing that goes into it. Also, the IRS requires that you spend money essentially within 3 years. They want you to take $100 million and just put it in the bank, earn some money. IRS will say, so we want those dollars put it in 3 years. Next slide. Voter demographics. This is kind of an important one because ultimately something like a general obligation bond requires. So here's what we do know: 47,012 registered voters in this district. The majority of them are registered Democrat. A huge percentage of folks vote by mail now. It used to be kind of the inverse. When I started, we had less than 10% of districts we had people vote by mail. Now it's nearly 30%. You have an older voting population. Now, if I was talking to a school district, I would say that might be a bit of a problem. They don't have kids in school. They're not using facilities, but with an older voting population, you tend to have folks who do. So that's not as big of an issue here. Next slide. So this one's an interesting one because it talks about voter turnout, and this is where you start getting a little bit into strategy and the importance of turnout. So here are the historical turnouts of voters here in this district, and it's the last 2 election cycles. Gubernatorial general, gubernatorial primary, presidential general, presidential primary for the last 2 years. And if we look at, and I apologize, it's kind of small font, but if you look a little bit in the middle, the 2 The third and the fourth from the right, respectively, 42% and 73%. That represents the last time voters voted for president. And you had 42% vote in primary, 73% vote in the general. So the question that we need to ask ourselves, and what we help districts determine, is can I get something passed for 42%? So those are your kind of your high propensity voters. I mean, really, if you look at some of the lower numbers, you probably have 1 out of 3 voters that never misses. Those are high propensities with civic duty. I always vote. Can I win just with them? And if the answer is yes, then great. Put it on March 2024. You're ready to go. Oftentimes, you can't. And you might need a different demographic that is a low propensity voter. These are the voters that only show up for president. It's not their civic duty, but it's the duty pageant. Let's vote for my person. And I'm a different kind of voter than that other person, right? I might skew a little more Democrat. I might skew a little bit more urban as opposed to rural, right? There's just different demographic characteristics here. And the delta between the 42 and the 73, at 30%, we have to ask ourselves, do I need the 30% to win? If I do, here we go. But I don't, and passing the time, then you go in March. Or maybe that 30% is back for me, in which case I choose March. So turnout's important. You can get that information, comes out of a voter survey, and you get what's called cross-tabulation data. And that data essentially tells you how that particular group votes, and not just by voter propensity, but demographics, ethnicity, age, gender, all that stuff. You can get a pretty good sense of who supports you and who doesn't. Okay, last slide here. This talks about a timeline. Now, this is targeting March of 2024, not because that is the best one, but that is probably the first one. And if you don't go or you're not ready to go in March of 2024, you don't take time. So, I should have said one other thing on bond proceeds. Sometimes folks who get personal tax or special tax or sales tax dollars have to wait, right? You get your money when the county collects money from property taxpayers. On a bond, that's not the case. Once the voters approve it, you have the authority to sell within 30 days, 60 days, however quickly you can prove legal documents and get things into the market. That's a pretty quick process. So the district has that seed money and it has some significant dollars to start on a project. So so on the receipt of funds, bonds give you the dollars almost. So what are the processes here? From the top, you got to know what your needs are, how you can spend the money, how we can create new revenue streams, perhaps, how we can offset some of my expenses, and then what are just some of the obvious issues. I walked in here and whenever I walk into a municipal building, I stare around, like, okay, these are those, okay, the floors need to be replaced, at the bathroom, you're missing a couple of things. So certainly there's obvious renovation and modernization needs that exist here. And those are good. It certainly says there's needs. When I drove up, I got a little nervous. I was like, oh, it looks pretty good. I hope it doesn't look too good. Because you want to make that case and people need to see that. So what are the needs and what are they cost at the top? Then the board, you guys need to decide if you want to even do this. And it's not do a bond. It's you want to explore it. Is there enough evidence to say we need money to do the following? And maybe my community is willing to support me. Maybe they even want to. Maybe there's people who would line up and say, count me in. Do we want to explore? The answer from the board is, yeah, we want to explore. Let me explain what that entails. 2 steps. One is quantitative, one is qualitative. The quantitative is a survey. It says it implies numbers, statistics, figures, and it's pretty easy to follow. People like this project, they don't like that. People are willing to pass it along here on this date, but they're not willing to pass it on that date. People are okay at a tax rate of 12 or 19, but that's it. So they don't want to go high. So statistically, quantitatively, you get that information. The other component is the public information program, whereby you need to talk to the stakeholders, what the city council, what the county people, What does the chamber think? What about top taxpayers? What about civic groups and organizations? What do you guys think? Do you want to get behind this? And if the answer is yes, let's be behind it. And if the survey says yes, this looks good, then that's when you monitor it. And a resolution gets prepared, it's brought to the board approves it, has all the details lined out as far as how much, when, tax rate, projects, all that stuff. It's approved, it's submitted to the county election department, and there's something at the end. That was interesting, and in my 25 years of doing this and 200 plus elections, people are like, you must be really good about campaigning and, you know, lots of tricks of the trade and, you know, Zen, Jedi mind tricks to get people to vote. And we are good at that, but not the mind trick part. But we're good at that aspect of strategy. But most importantly, honestly, is creating a winning program. Right? If you create a winning program, then the campaign committee's job is not to convince people and change their minds. It's just the hey community, you basically already told me this is what you want. This is what we're bringing to you. What do you think? And people should say, well, of course, I'm going to go yes, because we did the legwork up front. The deadline of deadlines and all of this is really 88 days for election day. So if it's a March, you got to have something in by the first week of the second. If it's November, it's the first week of August. If you did a special election, it would be 88 days for the average. But that's it in a nutshell of sorts. But I'm happy to take any questions if you guys have them.
John, can I just add a few comments? And thank you so much for being there in person. It's a big commitment of your time and very appreciated. I have worked with John in other situations, and I really have to recommend him very, very highly. Couple of things I just wanted to emphasize for the board is that when you go to the voters for money, if you will, there's really two different things that a healthcare district can ask the voters for. In this case, John is talking about a bond measure, which is effectively saying, will the community pay for a loan? And that would allow you to buy the property. You may add some of the capital projects that have been on the docket for a long time, such as the expansion of the emergency room. You figure out what that number is, and John will iterate with you in terms of what does that say to the voter? Is it $10 a year? Is it $20 a year, depending on the amount that you want to ask for in terms of that loan? The other thing that you have the authority to ask for, and many healthcare districts in California do this, is for an apportionment of property tax. That's more of an annual source of revenue for you, but it is different than a bond. And you would go to the voters separately. The only reason I bring this up is that, for a facility like Watsonville, there may be a long-term discussion that you will have about whether or not Watsonville Community Hospital is sustainable without additional property tax apportionment. And I think that's an important thing for you to discuss at some point. But with regard to the bond itself, just a reminder that if the community were to support the bond, this would remove over $4 million of operating expense from your income statement every year. It's just very, very meaningful, and it also controlling your property leads to things such as what Julie was talking about today. When you own the property, you actually have better credit and ability to do other things. So I think that there's the decision about whether you want to do this, whether you don't want to do this, how much you might ask for, and then, as John was emphasizing, that decision about whether or not March is better or November is better, and he can help you decide that. I think the special election is probably out for us, because if you call for a special election, you pay for the election, and you probably don't want to do that.
Questions for John?
Okay.
No, I have one like to keep our eyes on the capital. Are you aware of any You can see that if go to the bond market, we want, and then, you know, the world, we recognize that.
Yeah.
This is the.
I'm not aware of these, but I will say this, that doesn't bother me. Bother me to think, and if we think it wrongly, that, oh, if I see a bunch of bonds on the taxes, I did vote no on all. Reality is, we're gonna vote no on it. And we've done so many bonds where there have been multiple overlapping municipalities on the same ballot. And I think for every one or two people or whatever that genuinely changed their mind from being, oh, I would have supported it, it's the only thing on the ballot, because there were multiple, I think that is countered by a lot of the positive message you need to getting out from different forces, right? Different entities. In the school bond world, we talk about school bond. I don't want to be on the same ballot with statewide school bond. But luckily, we have enough data to point and say you're actually better off going on the same ballot as statewide school. Right. So, but I don't know anything specifically. There is a possibility of a statewide school bond. I'm doing that in November, possibly. There's a lot of time between now and then. But I'll give you an idea. We had Shasta College, Shasta High School, Reading Elementary, and the city of Reading all on the same ballot. Actually, we did work with the city of Reading. We worked with those other school districts and colleges. You know, Shasta County, lovingly referred to the state of Jackson, you know, independent, conservative, all those on city family. But then it was the city, so might have been a back and help, I don't know. But that was an eye opener. And we've done other analyses where people and so we pulled so much data with that issue. I call them complementary issues that because they've been successful. And issues on the same down. But I don't know any specific difference.
Yeah, this one put down in that you have something to chat mostly, but I know if I think something they had down saying, so like, what do you typically see for, I know you say they don't, but they can work with health districts, but for a health district our size, that we typically 7,000 orders. What is like a sweet spot from your experience of what is what
What would it and overtaxability? No clue. And I'm not saying that because I haven't worked with a lot of health districts. We work with a bunch, but every community is so different. So different. And if we went back, but if you went back and if you looked at that slide of successful bonds, and you looked at counties specifically, I would expect you guys to know the really elementary Ventura. But all over the place. There's successful programs all over the place. And there are bond programs that are $60. There are bond programs that are $9. Right? And everything different. Baja Unified, $160 tax rate for 100,000. 2/3 vote. Voters are like, sign me up. $160. What do you do? Right? And then you see bond programs that are unsuccessful. There are a couple of them. So we put great stock in that survey. That survey gives us tremendous statistical data that say this is where your pointed and this is where your strength is. Our most recent Reckoned Park districts, great comparison. They're 2/3 converted at consistently been and again, you're on the receiving end of a survey, and we're talking about cleaning the hospital, here's all the benefits. Now that they talk to you about how much you're going to pay, it might strike you differently than it might strike someone else, you know, citizen or someone that is the public that was Democrat. But if you aggregate all that data, you come back to the recommendation and say, hey, this is the price point in your district. And I would just be spitballing it into the data. Other than like 19 to 24 seems to like that and see much more.
Question for staff. Can you just get some perspective on the how and why or the possible bond impact? That makes sense.
Sure. I think one of the things we've often discussed is purchasing the property, right? So we have a option within 5 years, I believe, of taking over to purchase for 3 years. Yeah. So we have an option to purchase a park property for $40 million. I think that's first and foremost something that should happen. A lot of the things that were Julie discussed with the line of credit wouldn't be an issue if we owned the property. Cecilia mentioned the $4 million difference to our financial statement because of the lease payments. So there's no downside from my perspective on purchasing the property. I think that's first and foremost. There's a lot of other programs and there's more things that we'll get into through our strategic planning process. I think that will bring some attention to more funds that we could invest in the organization and in the community to benefit from long-term and ensure our sustainability as well.
Yeah, and I think to the extent that you don't want to be going back to the voters like every year, that identifying some other, smaller high priority projects, whether it be the ED, if you're going to go to the market, depending on what John's advice is, you would probably want to add those on.
I can just add, some districts, and this is through schools or hospitals, sometimes we don't realize that the voters want this. Right? When we worked with the Spurgeon Healthcare District 2 years ago, 89% yes. That 9 out of 10 people were saying, sign me up, fix at my hospital. I'm going to pay the tax rate against. Right? We've seen school bonds, the same thing, not in the 80-90%. All you need is 67%. Right? But sometimes people don't realize that, hey, this is what the community wants, and we should give that to them. We don't know it until we explore. Guadalupe, familiar with a little bit of the same part of Guadalupe, has passed 4 tax measures in the last 6 years. They went from a 0 tax rate to that in that community for elementary at Santa Maria High School. It went from 0% to $0, $120 in a 6-year period. Why? You're saying, give me that gym, give me that energy now. You want that. And all those bonds faster than 75%. So sometimes it's just, we still know until we ask to figure it out. And sometimes the community says, heck no, that is there. I have no desire to do that. Then you say, hey, it's good, then live with what we got. Let's not complain about facility services.
I guess that just a follow up, do we know either John, we hear numbers with our own numbers, how much property taxes, like additional ones, bond measures that our residents are paying off right now? Do we have that? I know that our boundaries aren't set and going off the best of the product of the possible district. That concern there, do we know what those residents are paying right now and do the property taxes?
I think you can get that information. It's pretty available to find out. I mean, the Unified School District has 2 measures. I think it passed 2 successful bonds in the last 25 years. I think community college district probably is a line item. And there may be others, but it's very easy to look that up. Unless someone who lives here must volunteer.
I can look at my tax statement.
Yeah. Here's what's interesting though. No one knows. We say we care, right? Like, oh, but none of us really know just how much we're paying. It's kind of like, I can live with that, right? Whatever I'm paying, I can live with that. And you're introducing me a new tax. I can probably live with an extra $19.
That's the reason I asked, just for your perspective of how hard it is to say, if you look at your property tax bill, there's like 7, whatever, 8 line items, do that in, like this for people with grades.
Or some, but we work all over the state and then districts that are on the 6th bond. 6 line items. And that's on top of, that's like an elementary school or the high school, and then there's a hospital in the school area. Some folks have so many, like, you don't even want to look at like San Francisco or Italy, because, but guess what? Those people say, you've given me more stuff, right? I'm going to pay for more stuff. But that may be an issue here in the neighborhood. You do the exploration.
These issues are free of this way for our cost to go. We would look at $150 bond. What percentage of all that?
$100 million. Well, so we're financial advisors. We don't charge on percentage, and so you will never hear me say open the paper bond that I don't get any benefit out. Right? If anything, I can say go for the littler one if I need to pass, but I'll shoot it straight and say go for the right size bond. But an underwriter gets paid on a percent. Our job is to negotiate down their respective fees. We just sold 100 million, 113 million in Ventura. And that was about 500,000, maybe a little under $500,000. So the lion's share comes from the rating agencies, the guys that do the credit report, and then those banks, those underwriters. And that seems like a lot, perhaps, but an underwriter doing their job is going to take on bonds of yours that they can't find sellers for. So they'll sell $100 million or try to sell $100 million, and maybe they only find buyers for $85 million. And then they're going to take $15 million into their inventory and run the risk that they lose money if the market goes the wrong way. But we're saying, look, we're paying you $250,000 for your trouble, right? But they're taking $15 million, of risk. So that would be a ballpark estimate of what all the.
So the cost of issuance to us, we blended into the total.
Correct. Yes, those dollars would come out of the district pockets. Something like a survey would. So just to be clear, that can provide all. So that would be
Jonathan, another question. What does the survey look like? I don't want to feel the exact too much. What do you feel there? What would that look like?
So first off, the university folks that we would want you to take with the probably between 400 and 500, right? That's the sample size that gives you a margin of error that reads. So that would be the start. It would be random sample. And it would be from a subset of all your registered voters. So 48,000 or however many voters you said we had. We strip out all the people who never vote. Candidly, if you don't vote, you're really not part of this discussion. So we strip all those folks out, and then you're left with the likely voters or a pool of potential voters. And from that group random sample, we get 400 to 500 people. The demographics of that group is reflective of the demographics of your potential. So that's the start. Specifically, without making like crazy details, we ask the attitudes towards the district. Believe it or not, if people don't like you, they vote no. And that's the harsh reality. That's more important than how great of a need you have. And I think we all agree is that if I didn't trust whatever Sacramento to take care of business, it doesn't matter if the world's falling apart. I'd say I don't trust you. Vote of no confidence. I don't. So we test attitudes towards the district, the board, administrators, the nurses, the doctors, service, all that stuff. We test attitudes towards specific proposed projects. What would you do? Be more likely or less likely to pay for new roofs, or new flooring, or a new whatever service, or purchase the land and save on money. All these questions we test projects, attitudes towards the district, tax rates. What if you do it would cost you $20 million? How about 20? And then ultimately the punchline is, would you vote yes or no if the election were held today on this measure that would improve the hospital, etc. Those are the primary. There's new areas that come out of it, but those are the primary areas.
Then I didn't know that. So, but Cecilia mentioned earlier that we will do two different things. Either the bond measure and I believe the appropriation bill as well. Cecilia. Cecilia, can you expand on that in any kind of significant way of like your experience with those two? I know you're holding your yeah.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Off mute. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. I think both Dawn and I are having a little bit of trouble hearing when the board members are speaking. You must be further away. I think what you were asking me about was that the difference between a bond and going to the voters for an apportionment of property tax. Is that your question?
Yeah, just what's your experience with that, Cecilia? You could give us an inside baseball look at both of those two options and where you've seen them either be successful or where they've been used and whatnot.
I think that the one nice thing about a bond is that it's a much easier thing to put language around on a ballot. So one of the things we didn't talk a lot about today, but it is so true, and you know it because you go to the polls yourself, is that how something reads to you, what it sounds like to you, makes all the difference in the world. And if it's not clear, or if it's just you feel like you're just sinking money into something. And so I do think that that makes the general fund revenue a little harder, because you're really asking for the support of operating expenses, and people may have issues with that. I John may have opinions about this. I think that bond measures, if they are very well written, are pretty crisp. Like when I see a bond measure, I usually know what I'm voting for. John, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think I mentioned earlier that, school districts are allowed 55% voter threshold, where everyone else has to do 2/3. But that hasn't always been the case. When I started my career in the 90s, you still had to get 2/3. So everything was 2/3. Even now, as districts are evaluating, do I want money for operations, or do I want money for facilities? They know that the operations task, in this case, a partial tax or apportionment, is just harder to get approved than the build or fix things.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hard. It's just the nature of it, right? So if I said, hey, would you rather pay so we get extra money to pay for staff salaries and pay for retirement and pensions, or to build a new wing of fill in the blank and repair leaky roofs? Most people will say, oh, I'll go with the one-time money and I'll go to fix things, as opposed to give my money to someone else, someone who made a comment about that. So it's just easier generally to get something done. And that's where I really encourage districts to say, you might end up getting more money on the operational side doing the bond if you're able to do revenue enhancing type of improvements. Mm-hmm. And if you're able to offset, $4 million just on getting rid of these payments, that is giant. Right? But those are things that we would certainly want to evaluate anyway. But all things being equal, I'm not speaking to Carl Valley Healthcare District voters, but all things being equal, it's just easier to pass a bond than to pass those up.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I suspect, and somebody could check facts on me here, but I think a lot of California healthcare districts that receive, most of which receive property tax apportionment, I suspect it was done at the time the districts were formed. I think that we have such a unique situation here, having this district created by legislation, and the legislature was able to create this district, but the legislature could not tax the people. A tax on the people requires a vote of the people. And so we're pretty unique to have to go back after the fact and say that we need that money, if you go that route.
I have some comments about that, but my board members, and then also the public speak about that.
I had a question. Of the bond measures that you take to ballot, what's your success rate?
Before COVID or after? Generally 85, 90%. And a lot of it is, we just don't put bonds on the ballot that we expect to lose. Mm-hmm. Right? So if they do lose, there's some extenuating circumstance, there's organized opposition that shows up all of a sudden and they fight it. It's hard, right? You have to get 2 yeses for every no voter. Double the output of the other side. But again, I'm confident in the right program, the right time, those programs tend to be successful.
And how much impact, if any, does the median assessed value play within a district?
It's the same kind of thing. If I said, okay, we picked $20, how much are you guys paying on your taxes? You guys should know your assessed value is, right? Most of us don't, right? So I don't think it plays a big amount. What I like to do, at least at some point in time in a campaign, or even up front, is to at least disclose it and say, hey, by the way, $20 per 100,000 for the average homeowner in our district actually equates to $5 a month, right? Or whatever that number might be. But beyond that, because a voter is not going to see any of that information from a sample ballot, all they get is tax rate statement, and everything is in the 100,000 assessed value. So I don't like to confuse people, because if you're confused, you vote no by giving them too much. Well, the average is this, and then the median guy's going to pay this, and here's your per 100,000. And then there's 3 different paragraphs between per 100,000 and the tax rate statement. So a lot of times we just let people decide about their own calculation.
Something else I would mention is that in another situation, I was working with John, that the locality felt like they could do the campaign and that they would just get other advice. I really recommend that if you decide to go this route, let John be your advisor start to finish. I think we ran into trouble by picking and choosing some of his services when in fact we needed all of them.
You don't have to pick me, by the way.
No, just
Yeah.
work with John. Yeah.
Pretty good interest.
Your, I think, kind of a name. Or 3 cities in the county. So this is like my case. I could go on and on. I'll try to think that just to clarify, make the business for all of it. I think we want to go to R&D process, but if we're a newer entity, I think we're doing everything well, so if you don't cast doubt and then help filter the statement for all of us to think about this at the time on issuing our RFP might be a 45-day process. We're adding maybe 2 months to this. Getting to a statement that March 2024 would be my preferred time when we go to the market. It's probably got 2% chance of us hitting that milestone, getting all the work done. Unless we really do a lot of great things really fast. So those are comments. Question about the special election, and thank you, Cecilia. I do agree. Casting a special election could add 150 to 200,000 to the cost of this. But I think it's something we have to keep in mind. I'm curious I haven't been involved in a school law like issue like this. Are there any differences in calling a special election? Typically, government can't call a special election once they meet the criteria of an emergency, economic disaster. They have unanimous vote of the board, and then you can call for a special election. Is that different?
So the difference for schools is that if a school calls a special election, they have to have 2/3. So that's the only difference. One of the criteria, you're 2/3 no matter. And if I didn't make it clear, I would not exclude the special election as something to consider. But what if you did that survey and you figured it out and it's like, ooh, that 33%, that is my best chance for success. Then you know what? I'm just going to bite the bullet, pay a lot of money to do a special election, but you're talking $150 million. That's a pretty good investment, a return on your investment to go $200,000 if I cost money.
Yeah, because when I'm trying to figure out when this was. So in the last election, there were 2 district board members who were elected in that election. So we participated in that election. Our cost in participating in an election that was already scheduled, as I recall, was $300,000. So I don't know what the cost of paying the full boat, but it is much more, because you're not tacking on to an election that's already occurring. And the only thing, Marcus, that I would say about the March versus November, you know me, I would always go for March. I think that John can do a little work for you to give you better information on whether or not we might run into just voter behavior of those voters who do not, that show up for every election and not just the big ones. is there anything about that type of voter that we would run a risk with? I mean, it's just a part of the analysis, because you don't want, you know, if you do it in March, you don't want to be going back in November and saying, please, please, please. You just do it once when you have the best shot.
So it's providing maybe insight into what some of the things I've been doing the last couple of years. Voters in the county have changed generally speaking. I forget, I think we're East County or they hold South County, there's a bunch of stuff, you know, where I come down. Is a harder place to pass measures in North County than where they carry things. So countywide elections really have to that North County election. That's hurt us actually first a little bit. Also locally in the last couple of years, we've had some shocking election results. So we have school bond fell, housing bond fell, and the city of Santa Cruz, the local place in California, per capita, failed the sales tax measure, maybe the first time they've ever lost, the second, but the big company. So voters in this area are behaving unpredictably the last couple of years. So this is not about no, just knowing what we have to do to get who we get with our voters. So we would need to form an ad hoc. We need to have, you know, an active volunteer group that's leading the Yes on This campaign. 50 people strong, volunteering, door to door, all that stuff. Very, very active. So this is what we need to start moving forward and forward quickly. I'm curious about, you know, it makes a statements because I love this stuff. And but it's already gone. That question on you going again, I haven't done a lot of school bond like issues. Are 40-year bond options available that can stretch out the payment horizon and reduce rates, or are there things?
Yeah, you can go as far out as 40. Don't recommend it. It's really, in fact, I've never done a 40-year bond because the interest is going to paying end up so much of that tax revenue. Remember, you're talking about the next 40 years of tax revenue, the next 30 years of tax revenue, and it's, I don't want to say likely, but it would certainly be possible that this would not be the only time that perhaps the hospital goes to voters. You know, what if the appetite of the tax rate is not significant? Let's say you have $200 million of needs, just throwing number out. They say, hey, I'm only willing to pay for 60 million. Okay, 50 million, thank you very much. Maybe we'll see it in another decade or 6 years, whatever. When you obligate those tax revenues out that far, so much of the dollars are tied up in interest that all of a sudden it makes it harder to get those future secondary or third, you know, bonds to buy over. So you can go.
I'd be really surprised if the difference in the payment per year per taxpayer is very great either. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm a huge TV watcher as a kid growing up. I'm 50 now. The reason this is relevant is how come on these infomercials everything is still $19? Haven't we noticed? Like in the 80s, no, 1999, get your 3 CD set or whatever. It's still $19. There's a reason for that. There's something about the psychology of what do I think is
What the number is.
Dollars is affordable. You know, and they don't even consider it doesn't matter. No one's checking their pocketbook. So bond tax rates also tend to fall within this reasonable range. And I don't think it's a surprise that probably the last 4 recreation and park districts, if we did, the tax rate was $19. I don't think that's a coincidence. You know, when we test multiple levels, 19 seems to be the sweet spot for a lot of folks. Will that be the case here? No. So it's, yeah, the psyche of the voter is fascinating.
But question on the timing. Is the tax revenue stream, would that be actually the collateral for the bond issue, or we would, well, the first thing we would do buy land, then that could be stable, but it just kind of thinks it's a revenue thing.
Yeah, so when you sell the bonds, you're pledging to the investors an unlimited ad valorem tax pledge. Ad valorem means by assessed value. Unlimited means I will raise the taxes to be whatever it needs to be, as I am the tax collector. So if an asteroid can wipe out half of the district, and the tax rate was $20, guess what the tax rate would be? Remember, half of the entire district is ceases to exist. The tax rate would go from 20 to 40. Right? I mean, and that is just like, I mean, that is such an unrealistic, analogy. But Paradise Fire, the client of ours, big deal. Even bigger was Elk Hills in Kern County that lost 2/3 of their value because 98% of all their value is oil and gas. And so they went from a public piece of property to a massive crush in the price of oil and gas. And the tax rate is tripled. And that seems crazy, but it went from $10 per 100,000 to $30 per 100,000. Despite cataclysmic losses in the county there. So that unlimited ad valorem tax play is what investors say. Sign me up, I'll give you all this money, 3% the next 25 years. Okay? Because I know a little bit more that. So
Your question for the staff. And any answer to this. Let's say we're already 60 million as the net and doing a series of bonds. The first 40 buy the land and then we're already year for capital. What would do we have a sense of what we would do that with that extra 20 million of bonded doing? Yes, we have this project, it's already scoped out, we know the cost, we're ready to like buy out a little bit of
PVHR is a big deal for us. We talked about that. We do have it scoped out. That's a $12 million project. And most of our partners point to that as a limiting factor for our organization. So I think that's something that would follow shortly after the real estate renovations of the existing. The EV is a big one. We planned that out. We had that design and planned out 7-8 years ago because our EV just doesn't meet the needs of the community and the configuration that it is and with our current demand. So that would be another one. That's 12 to 15 million. So we can unfortunately, very quickly get to $100 million without a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I'm not worried about getting your credit project or a slow down that we
Right.
do it with confidence. Right.
Well, those three are about 7 million. So
Again, Marco, I didn't hear what your second one was, but did that include any renovation to the second floor?
the first one was the property. The second one was our EHR upgrade.
Oh, so another one, because we do know that we have revenue opportunity associated with doing something on the second floor, and there'll be a cost to that. Plenty of ways to spend money.
No, just kind of
Are we at the end of discussion anymore?
But just clarify the services. You guys are full speed. If you're pulling for community campaign guidance, and then that's not good. We're just doing the bomb, like underwriter bomb council. It was good. Their experience done in your agreement, or those come back to the board to review those.
Yeah, I like you guys having some say and skin in the game to say, hey, you have a lawn council you like working with, because they're professional services. At the end of the day, what we do is professional services. Same with bond counsel, same with underwriters. They don't require an RFP, but most do RFPs. But if you say, hey, we really like this bond counsel, then I'll say, fine, I'll make sure we negotiate on their behalf to get the best rates. Same thing with other banks. Say that we really don't care, we're kind of agnostic about it. We'll say, all right, I can recommend someone. We could do a full blown RFP and we could invite every bond counsel to submit, same with the underwriters, or we can do what we call a modified RFP. So like, here's the 4 or 5 main players that do this more than anybody. Let's ask them for proposals for more bond counsel than underwriter, and then we can help you guys evaluate, help select it, and ultimately negotiate their respective needs.
Noel, quick question for you. Can you clarify the need for an RFP for professional services? Is that something that we would need to do?
So normally professional services and consulting services are carved out of the RFP requirements. That being said, it's good practice to try to get, a couple people to respond, a couple companies to respond so that you can look at pricing and qualifications and all that. It's the prudent way to go.
Thank you.
So can anybody in the audience want to ask a question or make a comment about the question?
I have no, I have no, raised hands online.
Okay, thank you, Don. So anyway, we're coming to the end. Any last minute comments or questions, John?
Yeah, I do have some comments. I might drone on a little bit, but the additional two projects that are not necessarily shovel ready, but at least have in scope that does help with some of the, I think, challenges that I was thinking about. Going to the voters and asking them to help us essentially purchase the land which we're sitting on. Literally 2 years after we saved the hospital, it's confusing. I think that's one huge hurdle that even if we say we're going to expand the ER and we're going to do other additions or improvements to the hospital, huge hurdle in communications that we will have to tackle. Obviously, if we want to be successful with that, with one measure. And I think right now, obviously, the polling will, say if this is true or not. I think right now what people love about Watsonville Community Hospital, not necessarily the property or anything like that. It's the people that work at Watsonville Community Hospital. So I really appreciate Cecilia bringing up the possibility of the other long-term operational one. I didn't know if that was something that we could do as a district. And her comment saying that that's typically where districts start from is that tax levy to have the long-term operational costs. And so I don't know if that's something that we can work into this. I know that we're, at least today's presentation was that set on a bond measure for 2024. I know of all just from conversations around the community, specifically in South County area, I know of at least 3 or 4, probably know of more that are likely going to go in 2024. I don't know if it's March or November. And so that'll be interesting. And then throughout the county, there's several more that'll probably be on the ballot as well too on both elections. So just overall comments, but I guess in terms of direction, I would like to, as we're moving through this, as we're moving through the bond measure process, if we do choose to go that way, I also not like to exclude the possibility of going with the tax levy as well too, just because, like I said, just from the ongoing conversations of why people felt they wanted to support Watsonville Community Hospital when we were coming out of bankruptcy, not necessarily because of the hospital, because of the people that were in the actual hospital. Obviously, the hospital gets some services, but people are tied to our staff. And that doesn't mean that we have a communication barrier that we can overcome, but that's something that we should at least consider. And like I said, just the hurdle of having people say, convincing people to support the hospital literally 2 years after that, it's confusing to the wording and better communicators than I will do a better job at communicating that out to potential voters, but that's a couple of hurdles that pop up in my head as we're just doing the initial kind of think tank process today.
You bring up a very valid point. I think there is misunderstanding or in the community about the purchase of the hospital and what that meant. I think a lot of people do believe that we actually own the hospital. And so that's a hurdle. As far as the other measures, I think John in his presentation mentioned earlier that we worked on one that had 4 measures in a smaller, more conservative district than ours. And 3 of the 4 were successful. The previous 2 were one. So
yeah, dozens of instances of multiple measures on the same ballot. I really wouldn't. Again, you can even ask those questions in the survey. You can find out, but if the county is proposing this, would you vote for us? County, either, or both. And you get that, you can find out where you guys fall kind of in pecking order of things. So we definitely want to know if there are other issues on the ballot and test those.
But for clarity, they would be 2 different measures. So one would be a bond and the other one would be, because they're 2 different things, correct? It wouldn't be one measure.
I think what he was alluding to is if there were other municipalities that were putting measures on the ballot.
Oh, no, no, I was saying that if we, yes, we want to purchase the property, and of course, saving $4 million a year does help us support our employees, but if we also were interested in permanent property tax apportionment, that is not the same thing as a bond measure. They would be two different things on the ballot, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that I would say would be atypical to have two asks at the same time. But that could be done. I mean, that could certainly be tested. You could say, well, maybe I don't need a $20 bond because my apportionment, I'm going to ask for $60. So now I can only do a $15 or $100,000 bond. So you could do that. Generally, I would advise against it, just because of complicating the issue about what hospital issues are more important than what things do. So, but you can do one now and certainly one later. But it's worth the evaluation. We haven't put an apportionment to generate in proceeds, but it's worth the exercise for sure.
Well, and it also speaks to sort of the communication around the bond. So if you decided that you could only do the bond itself, do you speak to the community about the savings that are associated and how that allows you to support our personnel? Because I do agree with you, Tony, about how people feel about our staff.
Any final questions? The adjournment was not anybody's face, right?
No. So are we adjourned, sir?
Sure, thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Oh, going home.